What's going on, everyone? It's your boy, the Fantasy Football Almanac, back at it with my rankings videos. Today we're doing wide receivers 21 through 30, so you guys know exactly who to be taking in the middle rounds of your draft, who are good values, who's overrated, etc., etc. We're going to be hopping in just a minute here, but first, if you guys wouldn't mind, go down, leave a like on this video, leave a comment, let me know how you think I did, who are some wide receivers you are hoping to get in these middle type of rounds, because this does make or break your draft, and subscribe to the channel so you can destroy your league mates. With that out of the way, let's get right into my wide receiver 21. So my first guy, number 21 on my wide receivers list, is none other than Gabriel Davis. Gabe Davis, guy going on sleeper right now as the wide receiver 32, so I have him 11 spots ahead of ADP on sleeper. Great guy to get in your home leagues with an ADP of 74.7, and on underdog he is coming off at 40.6 or the wide receiver 19. So where the money is vastly different to where your home leagues are at with Gabe Davis. First, let's get into the positives. He's got Josh Allen. I mean, enough said about that. Josh Allen, absolutely phenomenal quarterback. Will carry Gabe Davis to insane amounts of volume here. But two, he's an absolute touchdown machine. He's going into his third year now. In his first two seasons, his draft class was 2020, so 2020 and 2021. The only player to have more touchdowns in that time frame in the regular season is Justin Jefferson. He has 13. CeeDee Lamb's got 12. Tons of other great wide receivers in this class have way less touchdowns than him. The only one, again, is Justin Jefferson ahead of him. He's going into his third year, primed for a breakout. Last year in this offense, he was fourth in total snaps. As you'll see, I'm putting up a graph right now of total snap counts in the offense. He was fourth in total snaps, which might seem a little bit depressing, but then you realize number 2 in snaps, Emmanuel Sanders, is gone. Number 3 in snaps, Cole Beasley, is gone. So that leaves just him and the ultra talented Stephon Diggs. And Stephon Diggs, you might say, oh, it's a weakness. He's going to take so much volume, which he will. He definitely will. But this is one of the most pass-happy offenses in the entire league. In fact, they passed the most out of any team last season. They will definitely be passing the ball an absolute ton. And not only that, Gabe Davis had a 200-yard playoff game. We all remember that. 200 yards, 8 receptions, 4 touchdowns. What could get better than that? His only weakness that I can see is that he hasn't been the number 2 guy for a full season yet. But we shall see in time that he can definitely take over this role. The Bills are confident in him. He's a confident guy. Now let's move on to my wide receiver 22. This next wide receiver is a guy I think a lot of people have higher than me. I mean, I actually know a lot of people have him higher than me. And I don't really fully get the infatuation with them. His name's Michael Pittman. Right now on sleeper, he's coming off the board as the wide receiver 13 at an ADP of 39.3. And on underdog, he's coming off at 27.5 or the wide receiver 12. So people really like this guy. First, let's touch on the positives a little bit. There's pretty much no competition in this offense. I mean, I'll put up a graph of the depth chart this year. It's really nothing crazy. I mean, it's Paris Campbell and Alec Pierce. These are the two main guys he's competing with, and Mo Alley Cox at the tight end position. I mean, he has just as much competition at running back as he does wide receiver in terms of the amount of yards they're probably going to put up. He's got an insane 6'4" frame, so he's a touchdown, or should be a touchdown machine. In the end zone, hasn't really seen that throughout his career. We haven't seen that throughout his career, but I think in due time with Matt Ryan there probably will be more positive touchdown regression for him, because Matt Ryan is a slight upgrade at quarterback. I'm not going to say he's a massive upgrade. I don't think Matt Ryan is ridiculous like some people are saying. I mean, people are saying he's like the savior, significantly better than Carson Wentz, and he definitely is better than Carson Wentz, but how much better is he really? I don't think he's going to be that huge upgrade that everyone's calling for, but those are the positives for Michael Pittman. Let's get into some of the negatives now. First of all, he's going above where he finished last year. Last year he had no competition. I'll put up the graph now for how much competition he had last season. His wide receiver 2 in this offense had less than 200 yards. I mean, Ashton Doolin with less than 200 yards. How is that even possible? Paris Campbell and Alec Pierce should have more than that, and that should cut into Michael Pittman's workload at least a little bit. Finished as the wide receiver at 15 last season, playing a full 17 games, and finished as the wide receiver 25 last season when you account for regular points per game for every single player. So I don't really get why Michael Pittman's going so high. If he were wide receiver 18, he'd be fine here. But at wide receiver 12 and 13, you're practically drafting him at a ceiling. I don't get it. I highly advise against drafting Michael Pittman, but that's why Michael Pittman is my wide receiver 22. Let's move on to my wide receiver 23 now. My wide receiver 23 is another guy that people definitely have way higher than I do. His name is A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown right now on Sleeper is coming off at 28.1, or the wide receiver 10, and on Underdog he's coming off at 25.4, also the wide receiver 10. So this guy's potentially being drafted as your wide receiver 1 or a very, very high-end wide receiver 2. I instead have him as a very low-end wide receiver 2, but first we'll talk about the positives for a little bit. First of all, A.J. Brown, nobody can deny he is ridiculously talented. His yards per route run are among top of the league. Last year, 2.9 yards per route run, which is actually ridiculous. I mean, almost unheard of at the NFL level. And secondly, he should have a very large target share in this offense. I mean, the Eagles should be throwing him the ball an absolute ton. Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert are good, but he should be getting the ball a ton here. But that's really about it for the positives for me. For the negatives, I have a lot more that I'm pretty concerned about. For one, first I'll just ask a question. How many passing yards do you guys think Jalen Hurts averaged last season? If you said 238, you would be wrong. You said 218, you would also be wrong. That was Teddy Bridgewater. He averaged 209 yards last season, Jalen Hurts did. 209 yards. He had 9 games with under 200 passing yards last season. I don't think wide receivers are sustainable. When you've had under 200 passing yards, that amount of times, he had over 300 passing yards only twice last season. Now, I do expect that to go up. When you have A.J. Brown in the offense, that should go up. But if that skews to 6 games with under 200 yards, that's still 6 games where A.J. Brown probably is not a viable fantasy start. And the Eagles last season finished first in percent of plays that ran the ball. And I'll put up a graph here right now. They were second in total run plays last season, only behind the Tennessee Titans, the team he is coming from, which is a little funny. But the Eagles are going to run the ball a ton this season, and I'm a little concerned. And then also Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert, they might not be insane competition, but in a run-first offense, that is enough to take away from A.J. Brown's overall ceiling here, and that's why I have him ranked as low as I do. I do think A.J. Brown will probably make me look like a fool some weeks when he goes out there and drops 30 because of his talent, but I think the situation is too bad for me to be drafting him where he is right now, and I advise you to do the same. Let's move on, though, to our wide receiver 24, another guy you might be a little surprised about. My wide receiver 24 for this season is none other than the Lizard King, Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard right now on Sleeper is coming off as the wide receiver 41 with an ADP of 97.3, and on Underdog 70.6, or the wide receiver 35. So I have him ranked as the wide receiver 24. I think he's supremely undervalued in every format you're drafting in. First, let's get into why, some of the positives. So the first positive is he's the wide receiver 1 for Aaron Rodgers. When asked who his wide receiver 1 is, he said Allen Lazard, obviously. Allen Lazard is 1,000% going to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense. And why I think so is because Aaron Rodgers is a quarterback that bases a lot of what he does on trust. He needs to be able to trust his wide receivers. Let's think about who else is in this offense. Right now we got Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson, 2 rookies who have never played with Aaron Rodgers. Sammy Watkins, a guy who has no trust with Aaron Rodgers. And that's it. There's nobody else who Aaron Rodgers can trust in this offense at the wide receiver position besides Allen Lazard. And we started to see glimpses of that at the end of last season. Last season, from weeks 14 to 18, I know, small sample size, I get it. Allen Lazard finished as the wide receiver 7, even with Davante Adams in the offense. Granted, a lot of that was based off touchdown volume, but that's good. In this offense, you're going to be getting a ton of touchdown volume. It's Aaron Rodgers. There's touchdown volume galore in an offense like this. You average 15 points a game with Davante Adams still there. Without Davante Adams, he should be seeing about a 20% target share, which makes Allen Lazard a wide receiver 1 for one of the best quarterbacks of all time, top 5 quarterback of all time, just coming off back-to-back MVP seasons. I do not get why Allen Lazard is going this low. He should absolutely be going higher. The only cons I see, and they are, I will admit, prevalent cons, is that He's never done it before at the NFL level. I mean, his highest receiving season is 513 yards, and he did go undrafted. It's like both these things are pretty major, honestly, I will admit. But when he's going off the board as the wide receiver 41 on Sleeper, a guy who can easily win you your league, I don't understand it at all. I have him right now as my wide receiver 24, and I almost think that's low. There's nobody else in this offense, and it's Aaron Rodgers as the quarterback. What more do you need to hear than that? This offense should still be electric. Allen Lazard is a supreme value. Go out and take him in every draft in like the 8th round, around where he's going, because you can afford to wait. You don't need to take him as your wide receiver 24. But anyways, that's it for Allen Lazard. Let's move on to our wide receiver 25 now. My wide receiver 25 is Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin right now coming off on Sleeper as also the wide receiver 25 at 62.3 ADP. And on Underdog, he's coming off at 55 or the wide receiver 27. So right about in the same range where I have him listed. Some of the positives. First of all, Chris Godwin has done it before. He was the wide receiver 2 in 2019. I'm going to put up a graph right now. He was the wide receiver 2. I mean, that's insane. Not too many players can claim that they were the wide receiver 2 in a season, and Chris Godwin was in just 14 games. So he can ball. He can absolutely ball. We've seen it before. Furthermore, he's got the GOAT at QB. Tom Brady, the greatest of all time, enough said. He's also got pretty decent target competition, but way less than last season. Mike Evans is still Mike Evans as per usual. He still is going to be that guy scooping up 13 touchdowns in the offense. But instead of Antonio Brown, who still looked really, really good last season, we have a 33-year-old Julio Jones, who might be just as good, but we don't know yet. I mean, it is possible he is not. And then also, no more Gronkowski. The new tight end is Cameron Brate, Kyle Rudolph, Cade Otton. Undoubtedly, there is less competition now than there was last season, and Chris Godwin will most likely benefit from that. There are some negatives, though, mainly revolving around his torn ACL. I'm not entirely fading him based upon that. I think he is right around justified where his ADP is right now, because he probably will have a slow start to the season. With anyone coming back from torn ACL, you do worry about, let's say, the first 6 to 8 weeks. Coming back, not feeling 100% confident. It's totally fair. I mean, it's the NFL. You're coming off a massive injury, and there are 6'5", 250-pound dudes ready to tackle you at any moment. So it is fair to see him take 6 to 8 weeks to come back, and that's why I have him as low as I do. I think if he were fully healthy and had a full offseason of recovery, he'd be a top 12 wide receiver for me, at least a top 16, top 18 wide receiver for me. But now he slots in right about the wide receiver 25. I think that's fair with the ACL concerns. But you can definitely make a case to have him higher if you're confident he's going to come back healthy. That's it for Chris Godwin, though. Let's move on to my next wide receiver, my wide receiver 26. My wide receiver 26, I do have a little bit ahead of ADP yet again. It's Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney slotting in as the wide receiver 31 on both Sleeper and Underdog. On Sleeper, his ADP is 73.3, and on Underdog, it's 61.1. So this guy's going around that wide receiver 30, middle tier wide receiver 3 type of range. Let's get into some of the positives for Darnell Mooney. First of all, he's ridiculously talented. I mean, just watch this guy play. His quick twitch is absolutely insane and so fun to watch, which really makes me happy in fantasy because I love having players that I think are really, really fun to watch. And Darnell Mooney fits that bill to a T. Really, really fun player. But second, his biggest target competition is Cole Kmet. His second biggest target competition is Velus Jones Jr., 25-year-old rookie. And his third biggest target competition is N'Keal Harry, complete bust for the Patriots. He has nobody he's competing with. Absolutely nobody. I think he probably has the lowest target competition in the entire league, aside from a guy we're talking about actually next. But he pretty much has no target competition. Zero. So, I mean, that's insane. That's a really great start for him. He also had over 1,000 yards last season with more target competition. I mean, Allen Robinson did look like a shell of his former self last season, but it's still Allen Robinson, and he outproduced him drastically last season, which I think is at least notable. And also, he had 140 targets last season with 81 receptions. I mean, again, no competition in this offense, so his 140 targets could easily go to 160 just because there's nobody else to throw the ball to. Justin Fields stepping into year 2. should be better. I mean, it's hard to be worse than what he was last year. So I think it will improve the offense overall a little bit. Also, a new system, everything like that could be beneficial for Darnell Mooney. The main cons, though, are that he has such little competition that he will inevitably be double covered. I mean, it's just impossible for him not to be in the run game. Is not good enough for them to stack the box or try and stack the box. Be worried necessarily about the run game. So there's that. And then the Bears could also honestly be the worst team in the league. There's a few teams that can claim that title, but the Bears do have a pretty good shot to be a bottom 5 team, if not the worst team in the entire league. So that's why some cons about Darnell Mooney, but I think the target volume is too much to pass up on. It's near guaranteed volume. As your wide receiver 3, that's totally fine by me. Let's move on to our wide receiver 27. Our wide receiver 27, I'm calling him the discount Keenan Allen. His name is Brandin Cooks. Brandin Cooks right now coming off the board at the wide receiver 26 on Sleeper with an ADP of 62.5 and on Underdog 52.1 or the wide receiver 25. So this guy is coming off probably below, or actually almost definitely below where he'll finish. I'm going to throw up a graph right now of all of his stats throughout the years. But this guy's a discount Keenan Allen. 1,100 yards consistently. Every single season you have this guy, he's putting up 1,100 yards for you. Furthermore, his competition is Chris Conley, Nico Collins, and Brevin Jordan. None of these guys are guys you are worrying about in the slightest. He probably is the only wide receiver with a claim to say they have less competition for targets than Darnell Mooney. I think them two are far and away. I guess maybe Christian Kirk as well are the only 3 wide receivers in the entire league that have no competition for targets whatsoever. So I think it's a really, really good situation for Brandin Cooks in terms of the target competition, but a really, really poor situation when it comes to everything else. His quarterback is Davis Mills. Again, enough said. Davis Mills is terrible. I mean, I don't get all the Davis Mills hype. He went 16 touchdowns, 10 interceptions last year. That's not a good quarterback. Sure, the offense is terrible, but I mean, it's Davis Mills. Again, like, what more do I have to say? He was like a 5th round pick. Very, very much not a good quarterback here. Brandin Cooks feels gross because there is no upside. You know you're not getting a 1,400 yard season out of Brandin Cooks. That's just flat out because the situation is too bad for him to get 1,400 yards. But because he does feel gross, oftentimes you can get him at a discount. And if he is falling in, let's say, your home league, I would scoop him up at a value if he falls past the wide receiver 30 because you're just getting guaranteed production. And what more can you ask for at a position like this? That's my wide receiver 27, Brandin Cooks. Let's move on to my wide receiver 28. My wide receiver 28 is Terry McLaurin. Now I know, don't shoot me. I know I have him low. Don't shoot me. But Terry McLaurin, I have as my wide receiver 28. On Sleeper, he's coming off as the wide receiver 14, so I have him at double his wide receiver draft position and an ADP of 41.1. And on Underdog, his ADP is 41.8, but he's coming off as the wide receiver 20. Let's start with some of the positives, the good things about Terry McLaurin. For one, not much in the ways of competition. It's him and Jahan Dotson. Sure, Jahan Dotson was a first-round pick, which does mean something, but again, unproven thus far in his career. So we don't know exactly what Jahan Dotson is yet because he's never played a snap in the NFL, but it still is competition enough, I guess. Wentz slung touchdowns last year. Wentz kind of looked like a beast last year in the touchdown department. Every other department he looked awful, but in his touchdown department he looked okay. So, I mean, at least he has that going for him. He can get some touchdowns. Terry McLaurin's a very talented wide receiver as well. Having an 1,100-yard season, as you can see somewhere over here. He has had an 1,100-yard season in years past, so he could potentially do it again. It is possible, at least. And, yeah, that's really all the positives for Terry McLaurin. Let's get into some of the negatives, why I don't like Terry McLaurin as much. First of all, Wentz slung TDs last year, sure, but how viable of a wide receiver was Michael Pittman last year? Sure, he was a decent wide receiver too, but he was a decent wide receiver too because of the volume he was getting from Carson Wentz. It was not because of the efficiency from Carson Wentz at all. Carson Wentz looked awful out there. He did not support Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman realistically should have had a top 10 finish, and he didn't. He finished outside the top 20 in points per game last season at the wide receiver position alone. So that's one of my concerns for Terry McLaurin. Number two, Terry McLaurin was absolutely unusable last year, aside from 3 boom weeks. I mean, he had 3 boom weeks where he dropped like 25, 25, and 25. But other than that, he was dropping 5 points a game pretty much. I mean, it was absolutely awful to watch him when he wasn't hitting for fantasy. And part of that may be due to his terrible quarterback play. But another part of that is definitely due to the Terry McLaurin's nature of play. So I'm a little bit concerned with Terry McLaurin. I don't want somebody who's absolutely unstartable. It's kind of like Tyler Lockett, where Tyler Lockett is the type of guy where he'll have boom weeks and he'll boom, but other times he'll just be absolutely unusable. You want to have a guy more so, I mean, Jamar Chase is obviously the best case example of this, but a guy who can boom but won't kill you on your bust weeks. Terry McLaurin will kill you on your bust weeks, and that's why I'm a little concerned with them. But let's move on to our wide receiver 29 now. My wide receiver 29 is Rashod Bateman. Rashod Bateman right now on Sleeper is coming off as the wide receiver 33 with an ADP of 75.1. And on Underdog, he is coming off as the wide receiver 26 or an ADP of 54.2. So I have Rashod Bateman pretty much right in between his Sleeper ADP and his Underdog ADP. First, let's start with the positives. His only competition is Mark Andrews. I mean, Mark Andrews will gobble up targets like there's no tomorrow. Guy's going to have 1,200 yards at least. I mean, he's an absolute monster. But other than that, I mean, it's just Devin Duvernay. That's really it. There's not much in the ways of competition here. Duvernay, Proche, you're not worried about these guys. And second, he's got really, really good draft capital. I mean, he was taken in the first round last year. The Ravens obviously like him. Now they got Hollywood leaving. They shipped him off for a first rounder, so they obviously have shown confidence that Bateman can be the guy. But he just hasn't done it yet. To get into some of the cons, he's never done it, and he looked really pretty terrible last season. Honestly, so terrible. In fact, he finished with a 1.29 yards per hour run, which is really bad for the metric. But he is a rookie, so I am willing to give him somewhat of a pass. But also, the same kind of knock I have for a guy like A.J. Brown. This is a run-first offense. This is an offense that's going to be pounding the ball, running it an absolute ton. And last I checked, Rashod Bateman is not a running back. He is not. So I think he will still be useful, and he still will have boom weeks. But the only reason he's going to be able to be a decent wide receiver in fantasy is just through volume, unless his play takes a massive step up, which is possible, but we just haven't seen it yet. So that's why I'm a little concerned. I do have him as my wide receiver 29, right in line, right around his ADP. But let's move on to our wide receiver 30. My wide receiver 30 was a guy that in 2019 was absolutely on top of the world. I think that gives it away. I'm talking about Michael Thomas here. Michael Thomas, sleeper ADP right now, is exactly 66, going off as the wide receiver 27, and on Underdog, 57.3, or the wide receiver 29. So this guy's going way below his current ceiling, and I have him pretty much right in line with that. Let's talk about some of the positives first with Michael Thomas. For one, his 2019 was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, this guy was the wide receiver 1. I'll throw it up somewhere over here now. He was the wide receiver 1 by a fair margin. I mean, guy was an absolute beast. Wide receiver 2 behind him was Chris Godwin. It's actually the same chart as before, but wide receiver 1 is Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas looked like an absolute stud in 2019. Absolute stud. But after that, I mean, it's really been all downhill. Played 7 games in 2020, held to 0 touchdowns. In 2021, he didn't play at all. And now he's currently dealing with an injury as well. I think the upside is absolutely there, and I feel like I almost should be higher on Michael Thomas because the upside is absolutely there. But I think he's a nice wide receiver dart throw with a lot of upside at this point, more so than the dominant wide receiver he was back in 2019. I think he has a nice dart throw. I think he definitely is sort of worth it at his ADP. But me personally, I kind of am leaning other directions just because I feel the odds of him hitting just feel to me so low. He still is 29, so he hasn't hit the H cliff yet. But there's just been too many question marks with Michael Thomas for me to really buy in to what he's putting out and saying that he's going to be the wide receiver of old again. I just can't buy into it right now. But anyways, guys, that is it for my top 30 receivers. 30 through 40 should be coming out sometime within the next few days as well. Let me know if there are any type of videos you guys do want to see in the comments, whether it be like hot takes videos, league winners videos. Please just let me know down below. Subscribe to the channel so you can dominate your league mates in fantasy football, and give this video a like if you're feeling a little kind. That's it from me. Have a good day, a good night, and a good life.